Hi, Kim. So nice to meet you and have you on the Everything Saxophone podcast.
Yes, hi, thanks so much for having me along. I'm really excited.
Yeah, you're one of the few people that we've had that are across the pond, so to
Oh, yeah,
speak.
I am indeed across the pond, yes.
So interesting, so interesting. So tell us a little bit about yourself. I want to actually get into your background. When did you start playing saxophones, or what, was the saxophone your first instrument?
Well, my first instrument is always difficult to pin down because, as a young child, I played recorder and piano, all the things that children sort of do. But my first kind of proper instrument, I suppose, was a clarinet. Which I started playing when I was about age 7 in primary school. And I loved it, and I sort of progressed through the scales and everything as you do. But I never felt that kind of overwhelming love, for it, and that overwhelming kind of connection. I just felt I needed something a bit kind of cooler and funkier and a bit wilder, I guess. So I kind of asked if I could play saxophone, which back in the day, where I came from anyway, was quite unheard of. And my school was a bit taken aback, kind of like, oh, a saxophone, that's unusual. But to cut a long story short, I did end up learning to play the saxophone, and I knew straight away that that was kind of going to be my main instrument because I absolutely loved it.
Oh, wait, I have a question for you then.
Yeah.
Where exactly are you from?
Well, so I'm from a town called Cheltenham, which is Gloucestershire in the UK. So sort of quite a rural kind of place. Um, yeah.
Okay, rural. Okay, the reason why I'm asking too is because I know back in the day I started on trumpet, and so it was, even though there were, I think, two other girls with me that started, we were still harassed all the time.
Yeah.
And so I find it interesting. So, back when you started and you wanted to switch to saxophone, were you getting a lot of grief and a lot of problems?
Well, not so much grief and problems, but I guess it was stepping aside from what was considered to be the norm, if you like. Because you had kind of the normal instruments, like clarinet was one of those, which is why I started on that. But saxophone was kind of pushing the boundaries a little bit back in the day. I mean, of course, it's probably not the case anymore. But it certainly was at the time, and I was sort of considered to be a little bit kind of unusual.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Now, do you mean, I'm approaching it from like a female perspective, but do you just mean in general playing the saxophone was unusual, or just for women to play the saxophone?
Well, I think in general, it was a step away from kind of what was considered to be the normal kind of choices of instrument. But
Interesting.
certainly to be a female, yes, even more unusual.
Yeah, okay, okay, yeah. I just wanted to clarify that. So let me ask you this question. At that time, if you could even remember, I mean, you said that you wanted to explore more the crazier, more the funkier types of things. So what kind of music were you exposed to at that age?
Well, all sorts really, but again, I never really fitted into the kind of the normal sort of things that other people were doing in my age. All my friends and everything were listening to the typical pop music of the time, and it was all kind of Wham, George Michael and all that kind of stuff, which, don't get me wrong, I absolutely love. And George Michael, I mean, what a legend. But again, as well as that, I was kind of listening to the old jazz standards, and my mum and dad were always playing big band music, and so I was kind of into jazz and funky music, which kind of not many other people were really.
Yeah, that's really
Mm.
cool. You're very lucky when you think about it to have had that musical background.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, my dad would always have like Dave Brubeck on. I have fond memories of my dad, bless him. He would always be in the living room pretending to conduct the band. He had his own little baton and everything, and he was just absorbed in the music, conducting away. So I was brought up with that, in the background. It was my soundtrack for growing up, really.
Were your parents musical?
Well, so my mum wasn't really musical, although she did sing in like the church choir and everything. So she was actually a very good singer. My dad, he was a drummer in the Boys Brigade. So, I mean, he had a love for music, but they weren't kind of, working musicians or anything like that.
Okay, interesting, interesting. So I just had to digress for a second. So moving ahead, right? So you started to play the saxophone. What was, and I'm asking this because, American schools are different than European schools, different than schools in London area and such like that. What was your music instruction like in schools, or did you have to get a private teacher to help you at that point?
Well, I have to say, my music tuition in school actually was very good. So I had great music teachers, teaching sort of general music to everybody. And especially as I got older and was focusing more on music, I actually had kind of almost one-to-one tuition, because as I started taking music more seriously, most of my other friends were not taking music as an option. So it was kind of me and the music teacher just kind of progressing, so it was kind of one-to-one tuition, which was brilliant. And I did have an excellent instrument teacher who was mainly a clarinet teacher, but he did teach me saxophone as well. Although the only thing I'd say was it was very much geared up to the sort of traditional classical route, of taking your grades. So I did all of that right up to grade 8. But I wasn't really getting the input I needed in terms of the style of music that I wanted. So that was something I had to kind of do on my own, really.
When you say the grades, just to clarify, do you mean the ABRSMs?
Yes, yeah.
Okay,
So
got it.
I
Yeah.
don't know if maybe it's the same in the US, I don't know, but over here you have like a series of grades up to grade 8 that you kind of work through.
Okay, now I always thought, no, it's different here. It's totally different here.
Ah,
And from one state to another,
right.
the level of music education is totally, totally different. Some states are incredible with the amount that you get. Some states aren't. They just don't have the funding. Um,
Yeah,
and it's interesting, until I moved from New York to California, ABRSMs, we have our own thing in New York. We have the NISMA solo competitions for, younger people. But I came out here, and ABRSMs are a pretty big deal. A lot of people have heard of it and are doing it, but they don't do it in school at all. I mean, it's through, the private
ah,
teachers. So
yes.
I didn't realize. So the ABRSMs are part of your school, of your schooling. I didn't realize that.
Yeah, it was part of my kind of, training,
Wow.
my instrument lessons. So yeah.
Yeah, because those ABRSMs, I have to tell you, folks, they are pretty intense, and you have to play everything perfectly. And the cool thing is that so you have to prepare scales and arpeggios in a certain way at a certain tempo. You have to prepare 3 pieces. You have choices of amongst 9 pieces, you choose 3, and there's different styles in them. Depending
Yeah.
on the level that you're, or the grade that you're going. Some are more jazz oriented. Like I have a student right now going level grade 3, and he's doing "Bye Bye Blackbird" as one of his song choices, right? So there is some jazz in
Ah,
there, but you
yeah.
also have to, have to play your pieces perfectly. You have to do it with accompaniment, but you also have to know a little bit about the pieces. You have sight reading, and everything you graded on your posture, every single thing you could possibly think of. It's very intense, let's say. So I could see, yeah, I could see how the level of musicianship can be pretty high. So did you have any, you said you had like a one-on-one situation with your teacher in school. Was that all the way through, we call it high school, but was that all the way up through, before you went to college?
Yeah, it was the sort of the latter years of my secondary school over here. So when I was kind of, 16, sort of studying for music at A level, when you make that decision which subjects you want to take further, that's really when, yeah, it was kind of one-to-one. I was quite unique because, nobody else in the school was taking music any further.
Oh.
So, it was just me. Uh,
So how did that work then? What I'm really curious about, how did that work in terms of performance opportunities? Because, what about ensembles? What was the deal with that?
Yeah, so I mean, we did have ensembles within the school, and a lot of the younger children were part of that because obviously everybody in the school had music education up to a certain point where you then chose your options. So I was in the school ensembles, with the younger children, but I also stepped aside from school as well and joined lots of ensembles outside of school. In fact, a fantastic band I joined was the Gloucestershire Youth Jazz Orchestra, which was amazing. And I got to meet people that were like me, that had that love for jazz and sort of big band music. And it's actually where I met my husband, Mike, who's a drummer, and we met in the band when we were 15. So yeah, so
That's awesome.
yeah. We're still together today.
That's fantastic. That's great. Congratulations.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, so that answered that question, because I was thinking to myself, if you're, in a rural area, there's probably not as many kids in that school. You have to think, what performing opportunities did you have? But let me backtrack just a little bit. With the teacher that you had in school, was there one exercise or concept or series of exercises that you think really helped you, or made an impact on you as a player, in thinking back?
Yeah, and I mean, probably, I've got a few kind of like ideas for that, but I would say they probably came later. So not really from my school days, but when I've kind of studied with tutors later on. There's a few things. I mean, one of the things that I always like to say to people is to never underestimate the importance of listening and developing kind of the sound that you want to create and the kind of player you want to be. Because I know when we think about sort of, practicing and getting better, you naturally think of, exercises like technical exercises or breathing exercises. And I think sometimes people overlook the importance of listening. You need to kind of absorb other players, pick players that you just love their style and you love their sound, and just listen and kind of absorb it, let it become kind of part of who you are. Because I find it fascinating that sometimes when I listen back to some of my recordings, I'll hear a phrase or a tone or something, and I'll think, oh, that reminds me of, one of my kind of idols. And you kind of, you become absorbed in it, and it naturally comes out in your playing. So definitely that. But I mean, it depends really, I think, kind of what kind of player you want to be, and ultimately what you want to get out of your practicing. Because I think, I'm not one for sort of practicing rigorously. So, I know a lot of people do. And I guess if you want to be a really quick sort of bebop player or something, that's absolutely imperative. But for me, I get a bit frustrated if I'm sort of doing all these practicing things and they're not really part of who I want to be as a player. So I think it's finding, things that you want to develop. And another really simple one for me was I played my saxophone a few years ago to an amazing saxophonist. He's American actually, called Andy Snitzer, and he's played with some real top names, And I was lucky enough to meet him, and I had a quick sort of session, on the sax with him, which was amazing. But the first thing he said to me was just, play your horn, let me hear you play it. And of course, I'm feeling a bit nervous, but also sort of confident because I'm a player, and I know what I'm doing kind of thing. But the first thing he said to me was about the sound, getting the air through the horn. And it was something I think I'd kind of overlooked a little bit. And he was absolutely spot on that, one of the most important things is to fill the horn with air. And that can only be done if you've got the right posture, and if you think about it and you make sure that you're focusing on getting your air out and through that great big, shew across the whole kind of range of the saxophone. So, I mean, it's back to basics really with a lot of it, I think, just, getting the sound, across the instrument.
Yeah, basics, absolutely. Foundation is vital. Let me ask you then, who were your idols that you were listening to, from an early age? And I'm sure that's developed over time.
Yeah, I mean, I've got so many kind of sax players that I just admire and love. I think in terms of kind of influence on me, there's some key players. Andy Shepherd, he's a British saxophonist. He's really inspired me, particularly with his kind of atmospheric playing. And I did study with Andy for a little while, and quite often when I'm playing sort of the atmospheric kind of tunes, I can hear his influence coming out. But also later on, when I kind of developed my love for funk, I started getting really engrossed in great players like Maceo Parker, Pee Wee Ellis, Gerald Albright. I mean, they're all amazing players. And a lady I discovered, again, she's American. I discovered her quite recently, and I mean, if people out there have not heard of her, do check her out. Her name is Angela Christie, and she's kind of a gospel sax player, but honestly, that lady, she's just full of heart and soul and passion, you know, in her playing. So yeah, so many amazing players.
When you listen to people, you talked about how important it is for listening, and I talk about that all the time too. But
Mm.
what are you keying in on? What are you know, you're talking about absorbing everything, but can you be more specific about what you're keying in on?
Well, I think it depends on the player really. So if you take somebody like Maceo Parker, if I listen to him, you know, I'm picking up kind of the sheer funk that that man has, you know, and it might just be that he attacks a note in a certain way, and it's a really kind of sharp attack, and then it sort of stops dead. And you can sort of pick up things like that, and then you can transfer it to your own playing, where you think, yeah, I can do like, you know, really like sharply attack a note, or just a tone. You know, maybe a certain player's got a certain tone, or certain phrases that they do. So all it's just so many kind of things. It's just kind of absorbing everything about players that you love, and not to become like a copycat player, but to kind of take bits that you like, you know, and it always to sort of bring it to yourself and you know, make it your own. But yeah.
That's an interesting thing. And I was going to ask something else, but let me hold off on that other question. So making it your own, you know, let's talk about that a little bit. For you, you know, what does that mean? Like you talked about some of the people that have influenced you. How does someone make, you know, create their own unique sound, make it, you know, make that stuff their own? What did you do for you to do that?
Well, you know, that's a really interesting question, and actually probably one I'm going to find quite hard to answer because I don't know, but I kind of feel very passionately that everybody is unique, you know, and I think you've got to be careful in this industry because the industry is quite tough, and I think sometimes you can almost feel like you're being channeled in a certain direction, and sometimes that direction may not be the direction you want to go in. So I think I feel really passionately that people always need to remain true to themselves. And I think that's really, you know, what's within you, what kind of music and style, you know, do you want to play? You know, what is your passion? And with me, it took me a long time to kind of come to terms with that, because I think as a jazz player, when you want to play in sort of certain jazz clubs, you almost feel that you're being channeled down the route of being like, you know, a certain way. And I'm really glad that actually, as the years went on, I kind of really stuck to my guns, because ultimately my love and my passion is in funky sort of music. But also because I'm a singer, I also really like the old fashioned, you know, singing great legends like Billie Holiday and that. So it's about kind of finding what you're about and kind of building on that. So for me, I kind of evolved into what I call a funky saxophonist meets a 1940s jazz singer. So, and everybody, you know, everybody has a uniqueness. Every single player will have their thing. And I think it's really important that people find that and stick to it and remain true to it, rather than trying to become the same as somebody else, you know.
And your description of your playing, it evokes a vivid image. It gives an image in the mind of somebody, and then
Yeah.
and they'll know what to expect.
Absolutely, yeah. It's kind of your identity, your sort of unique selling point. You know, is what, however you know, you kind of describe yourself, and I feel really passionate about that, because it took me quite a long time to sort of work out what I was about. I kind of knew what I wanted to be, but I was kind of, you know, trying to sort of conform and trying to fit in and trying to do the right thing. And I don't know. And I think it's really important that people just remain true to sort of who and what they are.
If you don't mind my asking, I want to talk about that conforming and trying to fit in period, maybe that you went through. Did you feel like, you know, in terms of your studies, did you study like, you know, did you study bebop? Did you study all the, I'm assuming all the jazz standards and that kind of thing? Did you feel like did you have to go to those jazz clubs and do something that, you know, you may have liked, but not really, you know, not totally had your heart in?
Yeah, I think it's difficult because it's like I used to go along to sort of jazz jams and things where people would turn up, and everybody kind of came from a background where they'd sort of studied all the scales and studied improvisation and everything. Now, I never did that.
Okay.
So I'm very much kind of from the from the ear, you know, I've developed the ear, so I can play along and improvise to things. And I've got a rough background, you know, obviously I went through all the grades and everything, but I never went on to music college to kind of learn more about it. So I would turn up to a jazz jam and, you know, everybody would be like looking at chord progression sheets and that kind of thing. And I wouldn't be like that. I would just turn up and say, well, look, you know, I just want to play this. And it might be something as well that was not quite the norm. So I might say, well, I want to do a jazzy version of Careless Whisper. And people would be like, oh, you know, you can't do that. It's like, well, why not? Well, you're not, because today we're doing this, you know, and it's like, well no. And so I think it kind of put me off a little bit, and I did sort of almost withdraw a little bit and feel a bit kind of like I wasn't good enough, or I was slightly odd or whatever. And to me, like I say, it took me a while to realize that actually that's okay. That's actually fine, because that's what I am and who I am. So yeah, so I say, yeah, get on and get out there and do your thing.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for sharing that. And I think that it you know, for some of the listeners that are listening right now, you know, it may validate, you know, I know a lot of people that contact me, you know, like certain styles of music, and they almost feel guilty that they're not into, you know, like what everybody else is doing.
Yeah, and you know, and this is a battle that I've gone through, so I totally get it, and it's really hard to sort of believe in yourself so much that you don't get kind of caught up in that. And for example, like on my latest album, I've got tracks like Valerie and Baker Street. You know, in the kind of the true sort of jazz world would be like, oh, you know, you can't be a jazz musician if your album's got those tracks on. But it's like, well, listen to them, you know. So Valerie is like, I've done a jazz version in 3/4. You know, it's beautiful, just because it, you know, it's kind of, you can do what you like, and it's really important, I think, to sort of to know that and yeah, to develop that
and be creative. And
absolutely.
yeah, you know, I'm curious, and you know, I think there definitely are certain differences from, you know, the way everybody's thinking in Europe compared to in America as well. I would tend to think, again, you know, you had a really good musical background in school. I'm wondering if, you know, how do I want to word this, that it was more stricter in terms of you have to be channeled this way, and maybe that's why you felt, you know, out of place at times, because it, you know, and also being in a rural area too. Yeah,
possibly. I don't really know, and don't get me wrong, you know, I'm very grateful for you know, my education and everything, but I think as well, like music was never really put forward as an option as a career, so it was kind of something that you do as a hobby. Which is why I never went to music college, because it's like, if you say, oh, I want to study a music degree, people would say, well, why? Is that because you want to teach? It would never be like, oh, because you want to be a musician, because it's like, oh, you can't make a career out of music. And which is why, I mean, myself and my husband, although we had an overwhelming passion and love for music, we both ended up going off into careers, you know, different careers. And our music was always just a hobby in the background. I mean, it was always there, and we were always out gigging, but it was always just, you know, as a hobby. And it was only much later in life that we just had this realization that actually, hold on a minute, what are we doing? You know, we were meant to be musicians, you know. And one day we just basically both decided to just give up our day jobs, our careers, and our stability and everything that goes with having proper careers. And we became full-time musicians. And I can honestly say that was the best decision we ever made. And although it was very scary and a very brave decision to make, you know, it was kind of like finally coming home, you know, like, right, I'm finally doing what I need to be doing. So let's get on with it.
Yeah, you were teaching for a while, right?
So, I mean, when I left school, I did go to college and studied a degree, and it was in expressive arts. So there was an element of music involved in that, but ultimately it was a teaching degree. So my career path was already set out that I was going to go into teaching. And I was a primary school teacher for 20 years. Wow. And ended up being like a head of music in a school. But again, it was never really what I wanted to be doing. What I wanted to be doing was getting out there and creating my music and playing my, my music.
That's so, thank you for sharing that. It's inspiring. It's also courageous too, because leaving stability and, going out into the
Yeah.
unknown. When did you start? Had you created some albums already as you were teaching, or did you wait until you left the teaching career?
I waited. I mean, our music was always going on because it's obviously myself and my husband who's a drummer. So music was always part of our life, and we were out gigging throughout our entire careers, which is really hard because we'd have, jobs Monday to Friday, quite high-powered jobs, that involved a lot of work. And then we'd be out Saturdays, well, Friday nights and Saturdays, we'd be out gigging. So, come Sunday, you've then got to do all your chores at home. So Monday morning, I'd be back in the classroom and I'd be just sitting there sort of thinking, oh my goodness me, children, please. Shh. So it was a bit like that, really. But I mean, in terms of doing albums, I didn't even think of doing albums during that period. It was just a case of keeping the music going. Which was why when we finally gave up our day jobs, it was just a massive relief, because finally I could get on and do my albums and get my music out there and start building my music career.
And I'm going to ask a little bit in terms of when you were doing the gigs, when you were teaching, right? So were you playing? You weren't playing your own music then. You were playing maybe in cover bands and stuff like that. And was it that kind of music that you were playing? What kind of music was it? I mean, was it fulfilling for you, or was it just like, okay, I've got a gig right now and it's just keeping me going?
Yeah, I think it was pretty much, I've got a gig right now and it's keeping me going.
Okay.
And it was quite commercial, it was a mixture of things, although we did try and do as much jazz as we could. But that's difficult when you're not doing it full time, and I certainly didn't have any of my own music to be performing. So it was just very much commercial music, but it did give us the opportunity to get out there and to be doing some music. And we really enjoyed it. It was our kind of music therapy to get us through the week, really.
Wow. Okay. So then you're working for yourself, right? You're both musicians, full time. So talk about your writing process. Did it start right away in terms of, did the creative juices flow, or did it take a while to kind of adjust? Because I did the same thing in a different kind of way. I had a stable teaching job and I left it. And, it takes a while to adjust from that, from that steady schedule and that stability to totally working for yourself and wondering, where the next paycheck is coming from.
Yeah, totally. And I mean, it was, if I'm honest, it was quite daunting, but we were on a mission, really, because everybody basically told us we were mad. And basically everybody was waiting, I think, for us to realize it wasn't going to work. And then we would have to go back to, normal jobs. So we were kind of on a mission to prove that, we're going to make this work. I think what we hadn't realized was that when you become a professional musician, it's not just about doing the playing, because you become you're a self-employed person, you become a business. So the first thing we needed to make sure was that we had gigs coming in, because we got bills to pay. So, so the first thing was, I'm on a mission. I need to get myself out there. I need to get gigs. And thankfully, we were busy. We had gigs that came in. We worked hard at it. And I mean, we were out 5 or 6 times a week. So financially, we were okay. And, once we'd kind of built that up and we had a reputation and we were being rebooked for things, and we knew that we had this steady supply of, gigs and income, it allowed me then to take some time to actually start, thinking about my albums and creating my music, which I did over a period of time, because I'm not somebody that sits down and thinks, right, I'm going to write some music now for an album. All my original music is inspired original music. So it happens over a period of time, depending on what I'm inspired by. Maybe it's a person that inspires me, or something that happens inspires me, or an overwhelming emotion about something inspires me. So I kind of built it up over time, really. And then when I had enough material, it was like, right, here we go. Let's get in the studio and let's get our music out there. So that's kind of how it evolved.
What's your writing process stems from inspiration? What do you write things down? Do you record yourself playing things? Do you work things out on the piano? What's your writing process like?
It is literally as you just said. So I mean, all of a sudden I might just get something. It might be a lyric, it might be a melody, whatever, but straight away it's to my phone. I need to get that in. And it actually always happens in the most bizarre situations. So one that I remember was I was cooking a stir fry for tea, and all of a sudden I got this, the creative juices are flowing, and I'm shouting to my husband like, quickly, you need to come and take over this stir fry, I've got a tune to write. And I basically stopped the cooking and got a whole piece of music down. And that piece of music is now out there. It's like when it comes in, you've got to take note and get on with it.
And was that piece, did you entitle it some kind of cooking theme or something like that?
Well, no, I didn't actually. It was because it was something that had inspired me previously. I'd met somebody, it was a lady, a very inspiring lady, whose name is Karen Jackson. This is no secret, you see this story, because the piece of music is called Maybe. It's a song of hope. And it was literally, I was cooking the stir fry a couple of days after I'd met Karen, and she was in my head. I couldn't get her out of my head. And that's when the kind of the inspiration kicked in, and this tune evolved.
That's awesome. That's great. And I'm glad you were able to capture it. Thankfully we have we have phones where we can do that and stuff like that.
Absolutely.
Sometimes you can't do that. So let's talk about your album. So how many albums do you have out right now, and what was your first album, and what was that process like?
So my first album was back in 2016, and that one's called Make Believe. And I wanted to basically put a bit of a message with that album, because that album is all about following dreams. And basically, if you've got an idea in your head, and if you work really hard for it, you've got to follow your dreams and go for it. And that one's got some sort of quite a lot of original tracks on it. But it's basically about, just basically following your dreams. And also some of my favorite tracks are on there as well. But then a couple of years later, I ended up, well, it's funny because that song Maybe I was just telling you about, that inspired me to get on and do my second album, which is called Love Kim, which I released last year. And I had no intention of doing a second album so soon. I wanted to sort of leave it a little while. But I basically was kickstarted with that song Maybe. And it was almost like once that process had started, there was kind of no stopping me. I was on a bit of a roll. And that second album was a message to my followers and my supporters. So it's called Love Kim. It's as if I'm sort of blowing a kiss to them and thanking them for their support and their belief in me. So those are my two albums at the moment, but I've got single tracks out as well, and possibly another album to come fairly soon.
Okay, yeah, we're going to talk about that in a second. So how did you build your fan base? Can you give us tips and, suggestions?
Well, building a fan base is essential. But it's not an easy thing to do, and it's got to be kind of done over time. You've got to sort of chip away at it. And one of the things I found hard was coping with all of the platforms. With social media, there are so many, aren't there? So it's not just about building a fan base on Facebook. You've got to build a fan base on Twitter, and then Instagram appeared, didn't it? And you've got to get on Instagram and all this kind of thing. So you've got to basically just chip away on it. And although it's very time consuming, it is really important to build that fan base. And I'm very lucky and very grateful and thankful that I do have some incredible, loyal supporters who are just amazing. So, if I need to sort of pull them in, I've got a big gig, guys, I need you there, they step up and they do it. So I'm very lucky. So it's definitely about, connecting with other musicians as well, because I find it really nice to have support from other musicians, and then you can sort of tap into their network of friends and all work together on it. So yeah, definitely got to build your fan base.
Yeah, and actually, speaking about other musicians, let's talk about your first album again. Give us an idea of like who the other musicians were on it. Do you have your own label? Is it did it get radio play, all that type of thing? Because this is, across the pond. I got to see how different this is from here.
Yeah, well, I don't know how different it is, but I mean, The funny thing is that when we gave up our jobs and we thought, right, we're going to be musicians now, and it's like, right, I'm a musician now, I'm going to record an album. And you think that's it. You think, well, it's as simple as that. You know, you get in the studio now and you record your tracks and there's my album. It wasn't. It was like a rude awakening of all the things that you have to do to record an album. And basically I was learning from scratch. So like you said about, you know, am I a label? Well, yeah, I had no idea about any of that. So I realized that I have to either, you know, have a label that will release my album, or I have to become a label. So I am my own label, which is Cypher Music. And of course, then if you're recording covers of other people's tracks, you've then got to go down the route of getting all the permissions and everything. So I had to look into all of that. How do you do that? So I did all that, and then of course distribution, you know, once the album is created, how do I get it out there? You know, how do I get it on all the platforms, Spotify, iTunes, all that? So once I'd kind of finally got my head around all of that, I was good to go. And really going in the studio and recording the music was the easy part. It's all the rest that kind of goes with it, isn't it?
Yeah, and in terms of, okay, so in terms of like, you know, producers and you know, mastering and stuff like that, did you produce your own albums, or did you find a producer?
No, so I produced both my own albums. I mean, together with my husband, we're like a team, and we were very clear what we wanted and what, you know, how we wanted it to sound and what we wanted to achieve. We were very clear. The first album, I would say, was a bit of a learning curve, you know, because we hadn't done it before. But by the time I got to producing my second album, I was working with a fantastic sound engineer called Juan Lopez Vidal. I'll give him a little shout out. And that was just brilliant, because Juan really kind of understood what I was about, and he knew what sound I was trying to create, and he knew the vibe that I wanted. And so really my second album, when working with Juan, it was like the dream team. You know, we were singing from the same song sheet, and it was great.
No pun intended, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And actually, you know what? Let me digress for a second, because I was meaning to ask this for a while now. What, it's not a shift, but what made you decide to also incorporate singing, you know, into what you do?
Yeah, no, it's a really, really good question. And I've always loved singing, and I've always been in choirs. And when I was a primary school teacher, I always ran choirs. I had lots of children, and I've always loved singing, you know. But I guess I'd always kind of thought of myself as just a sax player. So when I went out to a gig, I'd always bring in a singer as an extra member to the band. And it was just one day, it was almost just like a light bulb moment. I suddenly thought, well, hold on a minute. This singer is singing songs that I love, you know, that I sing at home. You know what? Why can't I actually do the singing? And it was like a light bulb moment. I was like, well, hold on a minute. You know, why can't I be a sax player and a singer? And so that's kind of how it happened. And I then took a little bit of tuition to get some training, because obviously, although I loved singing, I didn't have the confidence to call myself a singer, you know, without getting a little bit of background about, you know, how to do it correctly. And I think that was one of the things I struggled with initially. Was I regarded myself as a saxophonist, but sort of, you know, having a go at singing. And it's only kind of as time's gone on and I've got myself out there and got on with my singing, that I now kind of say, yeah, well, actually, yeah, I'm a saxophonist and a singer. But it's a great combination, and thank goodness I did it, because I love the singing, you know, equally to loving the sax player.
And it's a part of your tagline now. It's part of your identity.
Absolutely. And it's kind of quite unique as well, I think, because it brings those two styles together that I was telling you about, that, you know, I'm a funky sort of sax player, but I'm very much a kind of traditional, you know, 1940s, you know, kind of jazz vocalist. So it's kind of a unique combination, really. And it's fascinating because, and funnily enough, it was just a couple of days ago, somebody dropped me a line and said they'd been listening to my music. And he said it reminded him of listening to an old-fashioned, you know, jazz record. And he said, you're like a little, you know, bringing together of Billie Holiday and Lester Young. And it was like, oh, that's amazing, you know.
That you definitely use that. definitely use
well,
that.
Yeah, I thought I'll keep that quote.
Absolutely. So,
yeah.
You were kind of alluding to a possible third album coming out, and I have to remind everybody we're shooting this during the coronavirus pandemic, and it's the experience is different in different countries and whatnot. We're having a tough time of it here in the U.S. I know certain parts of England are having a tough time of it as well. How has, and I'll get to the album question in a second, but how has the pandemic affected you, because you are a performing musician, so how have you adapted?
It's been strange, and I mean, everybody gets it, don't they?
Yeah.
It's been hard for all of us. I mean, we've not really, well, not done a tour gig since back in March, which is the same for all musicians. And I think to begin with, it was kind of, we went into a bit of shock, I think, of like, well, what are we going to do? And it's almost stripping away of our identity as musicians, because all of a sudden we can't do what we do. But my husband and I, we made a conscious decision that we were going to keep the music playing throughout lockdown, which we did. And we set up a daily show that we did on Facebook, where we built up a nice little community. And it not only was it sort of us playing music to people, it was also an opportunity for people to come and chat with us. And we had lots of fun, and it was basically to keep people's morale going and to keep us all connected, during lockdown. And I also was recording some twilight jazz sessions using an app called Acapella. So yeah, it meant that we could sort of keep creating our music with other musicians and putting it out there. So the music kept playing, because we really felt strongly that, people need the music to keep going during these times. And thankfully, I mean, we're beginning to see a little glimmer of hope that, we can start to get back to what we do a little bit. And hopefully, as time goes on, we'll sort of get back to, being musicians again.
Yeah, definitely. And a couple of questions. Are you still, we're at the end of July 2020. Are you still doing those daily Facebook sessions?
No, so we're not doing the daily Facebook sessions. We basically stopped those, as the world started to get back to some kind of normality. Okay. We're still doing the Twilight Jazz sessions, so they go out kind of once a week or so, and that's collaborating with musicians in the UK, and also a US guitarist called BD Lenz. So they're on my on my YouTube channel. Yeah.
Is your YouTube channel your name, or actually, you know what? I'll put the link in the show notes. Remind me, I'll get those links from you. Absolutely.
Yeah, no problem.
I'll get your other links too while I'm just remembering it. Okay, so yeah, so it is a lot of work. People don't realize to put on daily Facebook sessions, concerts and stuff like that. You probably were almost playing more than what you normally do when you think about it.
Yeah, it's funny, and I mean, our house, if you could see our house, we're in chaos here, because all of a sudden, this here should be our breakfast room. It would normally have a table in, but all of a sudden it became like our studio, where we're recording our music, and then our kitchen would be where we'd record our shows. So there's it's just random at the moment that our house just had to sort of change overnight, its purpose. We kind of quite like it. I don't know whether we're ever going to get back.
I like that. No, that's actually a great background, I gotta say. And for those people that are just listening, we have this video on YouTube, so you've got to check it out, because it's pretty cool. We got the congas back there, got some nice plants, we got the headphones going on there.
It's all here, but actually the congas are out because, well, I was saying about there's a glimmer of hope about getting back to some normality, because actually tomorrow my husband and I are into the recording studio tomorrow to record a new original track. Which includes the conga, so he's been having a little practice today. But I was saying about how my music is all inspired music. In lockdown, inspired me, and I wrote this crazy piece of music for saxophones and drums and percussion, because I felt kind of initially, when we went into lockdown, I felt very frustrated, and I just felt I had all this kind of like creative energy that just needed to come out, and it came out in the form of this original piece of music, which is called Crazy Times, and we're recording it tomorrow, so
that's
so there's
great.
one good thing to come out of all this madness.
Will that be part of this third album, or like how are you going to do this? Are you going to put another album out, or are you going to put out a release at a time? How are you going to work that?
Well, so I don't really know because the way I work, I'm very much, I kind of leave it to fate. I always find that fate sorts it out for me. So although obviously things do need to be planned, they kind of evolve with me. And I guess where I'm at is I've made the decision that I will be doing a third album. But at the moment, what that album looks like, I don't know. So I will leave it to kind of evolve and see kind of what, you know, it might be that some of these tunes that I'm composing at the moment end up as kind of kickstarting the album, or it may be something completely different. I really don't know. So I will have to see.
You know what's interesting too, and it's also I think inspiring and helpful to people. You had mentioned that when this pandemic hit, we were all kind of shocked,
Yeah.
surprised. Some people, many different reactions happened. Some people seized the opportunity and,
Mm.
learned new skills and figured out different ways to reach their audiences.
Yeah.
Others felt like, oh my God, I don't know what I'm going to do right now, and just
Yeah.
retreated.
Mm.
But you were one of the ones that kind of seized on the opportunity, and I'm wondering, number one, if you gained more fans from this, from the stuff that you did with the daily, Facebook sessions, and also with the Twilight Jazz too, and number two, how I'm sure you're absolutely going to tap into those fans, those super fans, when you put your album out. Do you use any devices like Kickstarter or Indiegogo to help fund your albums?
Well, that's it's really interesting how you've linked those two together because I'm incredibly lucky with my supporters, as I was telling you earlier. They're an incredibly loyal group of people. And when we were doing our daily Facebook sessions, obviously, as you said, we did naturally draw in a new audience. So we were gaining, friends and followers all the time. And something incredible happened, which is why I believe in fate, because fate seems to lead the way for everything. And I'd written this piece of music called Crazy Times. And I felt very frustrated because it's a great piece of music and it's quite unique because it's just for saxophone and for drums and percussion. So it's kind of not your normal piece of music. But I was frustrated because I wanted to record it and I wanted to get the piece out there. But being musicians out of work at the moment, realistically, myself and my husband made the decision that we can't possibly fund going in the studio and recording this piece of music. So I had to put it away, although it was niggling me, thinking, I really want to do this, I need to do it. And when we got to the end of our Facebook shows, we kind of drew a line under it and thanked everybody for the support. And we said we would do some reunion shows. And we left it there. And it was about a week later that Mike and I received a card through the post from the people that had been tuning into our shows. And it was a beautiful card, and it was thanking us for helping them getting through the lockdown. But it was also telling us that they had put a little financial gift into our bank account for us.
Wow.
To thank us for what we'd done. And it was so overwhelming because to think people would be so kind as to do that. And anyway, to cut a long story short, I decided I would use that gift to enable us to go in the studio to record Crazy Times. So those people are now kind of part of this journey, creating Crazy Times, and they're excited because they're part of the whole process and they've enabled it. So it's amazing. Because it's amazing. Up till now, we've always funded all our projects. I've never used Kickstarter or anything. We've always funded our projects, but obviously it's difficult, especially at the moment because we're not really working, bringing in money, so it's difficult.
I'm curious too, because you're going into the studio tomorrow, and again, we're end of July 2020. Our studios are open then by you, because certain parts of our country they're still not.
Yeah, well, we're still we're coming out of lockdown very slowly. Things are happening. There's a lot of kind of guidelines that you need to follow for things. It's like restaurants and pubs are back open, and outdoor gigs have been allowed for a while. And they've just announced that indoor gigs are kind of having a pilot scheme to see how they go. But hopefully indoor gigs will be allowed with a very small audience soon. But the studio, you see, this is Juan, who I was telling you about, who recorded my second album with me. It's basically his studio, so it will be him in the studio. And there's only myself and my husband involved in the track. So it's very safe to do social distancing in that studio. And of course, Mike and I, my husband and I, we're okay anyway, because we live together, you know, so we're okay. So as long as we socially distance with Juan, which we will do, obviously, and we take our masks and stuff as well, we're going to be okay. So, but whether studios are open generally, I really don't know. Probably not for lots of musicians going in all at once.
Especially if it's like a, you know, an ensemble of, you know, obviously more than two people. I mean, it's a quartet or quintet or something like that.
Yeah.
But no, I was just really curious about that. All right, now I'm going to totally take this a totally different direction, because this is the Everything Saxophone podcast. So I have to ask, because everybody always says to me, we need to know, what equipment do you use? So like what mouthpiece?
Oh, right.
What kind of thing?
I've got quite a lot of saxophones.
Oh, okay.
You know, it becomes a bit of an obsession, doesn't it? So I have got some beautiful, you know, older saxophones like Selma Mark 6s in that kind of thing. But kind of my gigging saxophones, my tenor saxophone is an Andy Shepherd signature or autograph saxophone. I don't know whether they're kind of available over in the US. I don't know, because Andy Shepherd is a UK sax player who I studied with, as I said, but he brought out a range of saxophones, and I think there's only 100 of them, so they're like a limited edition.
Wow.
But it's a beautiful saxophone because it's not lacquered. So kind of as it gets older and it gets a sort of a build-up of, you know, patina on it and stuff, it just gets this beautiful tone. So that's my tenor sax. And I've got on that a Godala King handmade mouthpiece, which honestly I can't rate highly enough. It's beautiful. I mean, it's not cheap, but I tried a lot of mouthpieces, you know, until I found the right mouthpiece. So that's kind of my tenor sax gear. The alto sax that I use mainly for gigging is a Selma Super Action 80 Mark II. Again, with the Godala King handmade mouthpiece on, because it allows you to get quite a good sort of funky vibe. You know, that sort of mouthpiece is perfect for that. And then my soprano is a Yanagisawa. I have to look because I forget, because I've got quite a lot of sopranos.
Oh.
But my main gigging one is a Yanagisawa. It's an S992 silver plated one. And I've got a Theo Wane Durga 3 mouthpiece on that. So, yeah.
Cool. Talk about actually two things. Your Andy Shepherd tenor saxophone compared to your Mark 6. Like, you know, can you give us kind of a description how they're different?
So the Mark 6s are lovely. I've always been nervous to gig them, just because I'm worried that they might get knocked over or damaged. So they're kind of a bit more precious to me, I guess. But they're beautiful instruments. But I guess I've just never really kind of gigged them. So I don't really I mean, sure, they would play beautifully gigging, but also as well, because they're older saxophones, I worry a little bit about their reliability on a gig. You know, it might be that, you know, the pads stick a bit or something quite goes out of alignment or something. I don't know. When you're gigging, you need to have a sax that, you know, 100%, you know, is going to do the job and you can rely on it. And the Andy Shepherd saxophone, I mean, I was blown away when I tried it. I've tried so many, you know, instruments and so many mouthpieces, that for me, when I get the right one, it's quite overwhelming, because there's so much criteria, you know, you want from an instrument, isn't there? So on a tenor, you know, I want to be able to play that really beautiful, you know, quiet, atmospheric stuff. But I also want to be able to give it a real rip-roaring sound, you know, and growling and giving it everything. So you need a sax that can give you all of that. And the Andy Shepherd sax just gives me everything I want every single time. It's just beautiful, and it just gets better and better and better with age.
When did you get that saxophone?
So I had it a few years now. I couldn't tell you exactly how many years, but probably about 6 years.
Got it. Okay.
And it's it's just beautiful. Honestly, I can't recommend it enough.
Yeah, the thing too, I have Mark 6 alto and Mark 6 tenor, and I love those
Yeah,
horns, and I understand
yeah,
what you're saying too.
mm,
I know though with the Mark 6's intonation, you always have to, you're always working
yeah,
on it, but the modern
absolutely.
horns,
Yeah. I think that's the thing as well. I was just as you said it, I was thinking as well, like my alto Mark 6, it's quite hard work, and it's a lovely instrument. And my tenor Mark 6, it actually belonged to Courtney Pine. So I kind of bought it because it tells a story, it's quite unique. But yeah, I do like the kind of the more modern horns, just for that reason that you said, that they just sound, reliable, and they just do the job.
absolutely. Now, what about the reeds that you use for each?
So reeds are always a difficult one, aren't they? And I think probably most of my major meltdowns at gigs have been over reeds. But the ones that I use, they used to be called Rico Select Jazz, but I think they're called Dario now.
Yes.
And I mean, I use those. They just do the job. Having said that, sometimes you buy a box of 10 and you might get 3 gems.
Yeah.
So it's the luck of the draw. I've bought boxes of 10 where I've had 10 superb reads, and I've bought boxes of 10 where I've been lucky to get 1.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Yeah.
And my husband says, well, it's a bit much if you spent all that money and you only get 1 reed. But the frustration is that when you get that 1 reed from that make, it's just to die for, and you just wish it would last forever,
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Right. Now, another saxophone related type of question. If there was one exercise that you have to do every day on the saxophone, what would that be for you and why?
Well, so again, it's difficult because I'm a bit naughty with my kind of practicing. And I think maybe I justify it by saying that, when I'm actually working and I'm not in lockdown, I'm out, maybe 5 or 6 times a week playing. So it's kind of limited what I do. But there is an exercise which I really like doing, because that's the key as well, I think, to pick an exercise that you actually enjoy doing, that you're then going to make the effort to do. And so when I get my saxes out the case, I instinctively do this exercise. And it's a great exercise because it allows you to go all across the instrument and cover every note. So it's giving you really good coverage of all the notes. And also it's a good exercise you can do even if you haven't got your saxes, because you can move your fingers. Even like sometimes when we're traveling to gigs in the car, I'll just be working my way through the exercise. And I guess the only way I can do it probably is to sing it to you and then explain it to you, but it's not rocket science. But it basically goes, so you start maybe on C major and you go da 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 da
Oh my
da
God.
da 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 da. Do you know it?
Yeah, because that's the Herbert Clark Technical Studies for Trumpet #2.
Oh, is it? Oh, you're an expert.
I play trumpet also, so that's like one of our Bibles. That's one of the things that we use. So
I love it. And then you go down to the relative minor. Do you do that?
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, how funny.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Oh, that is. Well, you see, I got this because, again, and I'm making myself sound terrible, but, I get quite bored with kind of exercises, unless I kind of I'm inspired by it. And this one actually was given to me by a British saxophonist called James Morton. And I don't know whether in the States you're familiar with him, but he's a sort of great funky sax player. And I had a few sessions with him, and he gave me this little fingering exercise, and I just loved it. And I find myself, sitting, watching telly, just kind of, just doing it, even without the sax. But it's just great because it gets you all over the horn, getting all those keys that none of us want to play in, and it's just great.
Okay, this is interesting, and I have to remember, I think it's Rich Wiley, trumpet player, many years ago. In fact, I think I had bought this book in 2011. I was looking through some old stuff the other day, and Baptism Publishing, folks. Rich Wiley, it's variations on Clark's second study. So it's not just that line, it's also, instead of ba da 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 1 2 3 1, 1 3 2 1 ba da 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 ba ba da da ba ba da da
Oh,
ba ba.
okay.
So it's like
Yeah.
all variations like that in all types of different, like diminished, minor, augmented, all types of things,
Yeah.
all types of variations. That may be something that you may want to check out, as a variation
Yeah.
of what you're doing, because it's a beautiful melody.
And that's the thing, that because I haven't sort of studied all the kind of the ins and outs of kind of improvisation and all that, I'm very much a melodic player, and a lot of it's by ear. And I think I love those kind of exercises because, as you say, they are melodic. So they make sense and they sound nice and they're nice to play. So yeah, I'm definitely going to be checking that out.
All right, I can make a mental note. I'll search for it and I'll send you the link. And I'll try to make a mental note too to include the link also in the show notes as well. You mentioned that you mostly play by ear. You have a really good ear. How did you develop that ear? And can you give a tip to our listeners for developing their ears?
Well, I don't know. And I mean, I kind of became aware of my ear back when I was much younger at school. And the reason that it came about was I was studying music and I was doing some oral tests. And it was basically a melody was being played on the old-fashioned cassettes. You're probably too young, but back in my day, it was like
No, I was just fixing my cassette player yesterday. I swear to you, because my
Oh,
receiver, my Denon receiver, finally died. I've had this receiver since 1991. I have the cassette player since 1991. I had to replace the CD player 2 years ago. So I was just going through some cassettes, and again, my favorite teacher of all time, Vince Penzarella, great trumpet player. So I was listening to a lecture that he did at the International Trumpet Guild in the year 2000, and I swear to you, I was listening to the cassette for that. That's so funny that you mentioned that.
oh, well, so you know what I mean, well, the old-fashioned cassette there.
Oh yeah.
So I was doing this like oral test on cassette where you had to pick out like intervals and things, but it wasn't being played on the piano there and then. It was being played on this cassette machine. And of course, when it went off to be marked all officially, and when it came back, I had got 0, every single question wrong. And my teacher was like horrified because with my oral tests, I'd always get everything right. So it was like, well, we needed to get some clarification as to what on earth was going on here. And anyway, to cut a long story short, when they looked back at it all, every single one of my answers was a semitone out. And it turned out that the speed that the cassette was going round was like making the note slightly wrong, slightly flatter or whatever it was. So unfortunately, I mean, I was naughty really, because I should have been listening and getting the interval on the cassette, but my ear was telling me the note I was hearing. So if it was a G, but it was sounding like an F sharp on the tape, my brain was telling me it's an F sharp. So I realized at that point, it became aware that I had perfect pitch. So if somebody played a note, I knew what that note was. And of course, if you're giving me an oral test on a cassette where the notes are not sounding as they should be, then it's going to throw me, which it did. But I wasn't aware of it until that point. And of course, once I became aware that I had perfect pitch, it was like a party piece, I'd say, oh, play me a note on the piano. And I would go, C, yeah, play me another one. Yeah, G sharp, So kind of, a lot of it, I guess, is kind of in you. But I haven't actually got it so good now. Now I sort of try to play a note on the piano and I'm wrong, so somehow it doesn't always necessarily, it's not always fair. But I guess it's just to develop that ear is just kind of like, listening to intervals and getting to recognize, the relationship between notes. So just it's listening again, isn't it, really? And just absorbing it.
Okay, two things. So with perfect pitch, when I'd gone to Tanglewood as a young composer. It was the first time they introduced the program. Tanglewood's a summer music camp, very world renowned. And so one of the other young composers that was in there, a young lady, had perfect pitch. And we were exposed to all types of music. So we were exposed to gamelan music, which is, an Eastern, Far Eastern type of style of music that wasn't pitched the way we're used to in the Western world.
Right.
It would drive her crazy. It would drive her absolutely crazy. But when I was teaching band in schools on Long Island for a number of years, I had taught a whole family, and all the boys had perfect pitch. And actually, some of them had been profiled on TV because they're just so accomplished. But I remember the youngest boy, I taught him alto saxophone. Now, he was a very accomplished pianist. And so it was really tough for him because I would, you know, there's the transposition that's involved. You have to, from the concert pitch, you either go up, you know, a major sixth or down a minor third. But for him, you know, a C sounds like this, but on the alto saxophone, a C does not sound like the C that he knows.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I wonder, how did you deal with that when you started to learn saxophone? Did that mess you up for a while?
No, and you know, I'd never even thought of it. And I don't know how this is because I can sort of instinctively know what the note is on a saxophone when I hear it. So whether my brain just makes allowances for it, I don't know. Or whether it's because I play the sax, I'm familiar with when I play a C, what that sounds like. So I don't know. I don't have an answer to that, but I totally get what you're saying and how confusing that might be.
Yeah, and plus, not only with that, and by the way, the party aspect of that. So whenever we had class and stuff like that, I say, "Okay, Chris, here, let me play this pitch for you.
Yeah.
What is it? Oh, that's blah. Okay, what about this? Oh, that's blah."
Yeah.
I used to love doing that to him. It was so much fun. But you just remind me.
Yeah.
But
Oh.
but intonation though. Okay, so how, you know, does that drive you crazy if, you know, an instrument is out of tune? Because I know some people that will drive them absolutely bonkers if they have perfect pitch.
Yeah. And I've been amongst people like that. We did a gig a few years ago with a young lady that she was autistic, but she kind of had this amazing like sort of gift of music, and she would just be hot on it. So she was a piano player, but if the piano was slightly out of tune, it would literally drive her insane. She couldn't play it, you know, just be like, no, I can't. And it would only be a fraction, you know, out of tune.
Wow.
And I think with myself, I mean, I'm very aware, like when I'm out of tune, it does drive me crazy on gigs, especially, you know, like you do an outdoor gig and you're up against the changes of temperature or whatever. And I might have not played my soprano, you know, for a few numbers, and I'll pick it up, you know, and I'm committed to playing, but all of a sudden I'm thinking, I'm out of tune here, what am I going to do? I'm in the middle of playing, and I have to correct it. I cannot go on. But I wouldn't say I'm sort of, you know, overly kind of mad about it, because I think my perfect pitch ear is not what it used to be. I don't think it's like when I was back as a child. So I'm pretty cool about it already. Just whatever, anything goes really.
That's actually good. That probably saves your sanity. But I bet you though, one of the questions I was going to ask earlier, you know, in developing your ears, did you ever transcribe solos from your favorite artists?
I did, although I never really got into that extensively, because again, I would be one of these people that would just kind of listen and sort of, you know, do it. But I do remember sitting down, you know, as a teenager and, you know, working stuff out and transcribing loads of solos. It's a very good thing to do. And a real sense of achievement, isn't it? You know, when you've got that solo that you just think, wow, you know, and you finally transcribe it and you finally kind of achieve it, and you're just like, yeah, you know, check me out, I can play that.
Absolutely. Well, listen, Kim, I wanted to thank you so much for your time. But before we go, can you tell our listeners where to find you online?
Oh yes, of course. And I love to connect with people. So I'm on all social media platforms. So you can find me on Facebook. I'm Kim Cypher. I'm on Twitter as well, Kim Cypher Sax, Instagram. But also, you know, you can find my music on YouTube, Spotify, iTunes, all the usual places. And of course, my website, which is kimcypher.com.
That's what I was going to ask. Okay, great. And what we'll do, folks, we're going to put the links in the show notes, so this way you can check out Kim's music and be the first to know. Do you have an email list or newsletter or something?
I do, yeah. And people can subscribe to my newsletter on my website. So if you just head on over to kimcypher.com and I think it's at the bottom, you just click subscribe to the newsletter. So then, yeah, you'll get all the latest news from me.
And I'm sure that they'll be the first to know when your new Crazy Times piece is ready to come out.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's going to be a crazy video to go with it, so you don't want to miss it.
Oh, cool. Now, when are you shooting that?
So that's going to be at the end of August. I've got a very, very cool location and a bit of a crazy kind of vibe going on. So it'll be a chance for us all to let off some steam, you know, after these crazy times.
Absolutely. Well, that's awesome. Listen, Kim, I want to again thank you so much for your time and just sharing some tips and your story. I thought it was really cool and very inspiring. And
Oh,
congratulations on your success as
thank
well.
you. No, it's been an absolute pleasure. And can I thank you very much indeed for having me on? And fair play to you and well done. And thank you for what you do. Because obviously I came across you by checking out Everything Saxophone. And I've been watching all your interviews and all the tips and everything. So it's a great job that you do. So thank you.
Thanks so much.